Good morning, everyone. My name is Gary Kraus. I'm the Bureau Director of Technical Services with NDIS and DSPS. And I would like to take a moment to thank everyone for attending this important meeting. Presently, I'm showing approximately 354 participants. And today we're valuing everybody's time. So for your planning purposes, this presentation will be put on by Randy Dahlman. And it's going to last approximately 2.5 hours, so somewhere around the 2.5 hour time frame. So then you'll be able to get back out there and keep working on what you're working on. And this is an in-depth presentation or an overview of many things, I should say. And because of the volume of people, there won't be a question and answer stage, but rather there will be just information provided in this overview by Randy. At the close, Randy will close it out and then the meeting will be done. And I wish you all a good day and hope you find it very helpful and beneficial. Thank you. Randy?
Right. All right, let's see. I believe you can see me now. Is that correct?
You're good.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Randy Dahlman. On behalf of the Wisconsin Department of Safety and Professional Services, I'd like to welcome you to today's training. For those I've not had the pleasure of crossing with, many of you I've seen at the UW Code Refresher, others I've seen at Building Inspector training. Certainly looking forward to working with you. As many of you may or may not know, I'm a plan reviewer for the Department of Safety and Professional Services. I've been working with the department for nearly 31 consecutive years. I graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and received both my bachelor's and my master's degree in engineering. I'm also licensed here in Wisconsin as a professional engineer, as a commercial building inspector, and I'm also licensed as an HVAC qualifier. Now, this is the first of two identical training sessions. Now, today obviously is the 14th. We'll have another set of trainings very similar to this. It's going to be basically the same thing. Maybe we tweak things a little bit. We'll learn something. And we'll jump to the 28th and basically the same time, etc. So if you know of a professional that you work with, or maybe you want to see it again, just to reinforce what you thought you learned, we will have this presentation again on the 28th, but please note it's going to be basically exactly what I'm going to give today. Our emphasis today for roughly 2.5 hours is going to be on the Wisconsin amendments as adopted for use with the 2021 ICC codes. Now, we will not be talking about the actual changes as contained within going from the 2015 IBC and the IECC, IMC, IFGC, IEBC. Boy, there's a lot of letters there. We're not going to look at the books, not today. Today we're looking at only the Wisconsin amendments that are unique only to the state of Wisconsin. Okay, and I'll get into that here in a little bit. Today's attendees are expected to be a mix of a wide variety of individuals. I mean, clearly we have architects, professional engineers, specialty designers, contractors, building owners, and of course, our commercial building inspectors, all throughout the state of Wisconsin, and I assume a few outside the state. Now, if the licensed professionals have wondered why it seems like they're so busy in the office, I'd like to share the following with you. I recently had to switch my office here in Madison, and in the process of switching my office, of course, you dig up a lot of things, and one of the things I found was some data from 2004, which I'm going to share with you now. In 2004, there were 4,872 architects. In 2025, there's 5,064. In other words, architects, the number of architects licensed in the state of Wisconsin went up 3.9%. Oh, okay. In 2004, there were 19,600 professional engineers. In 2025, there's 16,125. In other words, the number of licensed professionals involving the professional engineer's license is down 18%. And if you look back in 2004, there were 1,032 engineered system, if you will, designer licenses issued in the state of Wisconsin. In 2025, they're down to 798, which is a reduction of 23% of these designer licenses. So if you take all those professionals who are the professionals at Stamp and have a lot of oversight on many of our commercial buildings, those three licenses together have an overall drop of 14% in the overall number of licenses issued, active, I should say, here in the state of Wisconsin since 2004. So it's something to think about if you're wondering why you're busy. For those of you who like a little history, the Wisconsin Commercial Building Code is the longest in-place commercial building code in the United States. The code has been established since 1914. So if you do your quick math, that code's been in place for 111 years. Wisconsin first adopted the use of the Code Council Suites, the ICC, on July 1st of 2002. And with the adoption of the 2021 ICC codes, this will be the 6th adoption of the ICC codes. Now, prior to the adoption of the ICC codes in 2002, the state of Wisconsin wrote their own independent code. The development of the ICC and its code came about because the federal government had a lot of bickering from design professionals who jumped to different states. And the rules changed. And there are obviously the independent states such as Wisconsin, but there were groupings of states, BOCA code, which was out east, which concentrated on snow loads. There was the Southern Building Code, which dealt with the hurricanes of the South. And of course, out west, there was the Uniform Code, which emphasized a lot of seismic efforts. So rather than have all these codes, the Fed said, look, you either get together and come up with one code or we'll write one. And of course, nobody wanted to have the federals write a national code. So the three groups got together. They basically looked at all their rules. If 2 out of 3 had the same rule, if all 3 had the same rule, it became part of the code. They could appeal to one another. If one of the rules, for instance, like seismic in California, wasn't a big issue in New York, they could emphasize that and include it in the code. And it kind of became a bartering session as to, what seemed valid for life safety. And they came up with their first full code in 2000. The Energy Code actually came out in 1998. And every 3 years since then, the ICC code has a new edition issued to the public. So we're just now adopting the 2021. The 2024 is out. We would be looking, as per past tradition, every 6 years. So we'd be looking at the 2027 version moving forward. As we all know, the department's adopted various versions of the code. And when we've always had amendments. And of course, some people think that amendments are inappropriate. Hey, just adopt it as written. And then of course there's those, well, what are these amendments? What's the big deal about them? Well, these amendments are changes from the published code that the state of Wisconsin, based on its extensive years of adoption, has included so as to modify the adopted ICC code. Now, one common reason for the inclusion of the Wisconsin amendments involves the need to address adopted state laws and statutes. Okay. Now, in the state of Wisconsin, for instance, the Uniform Dwelling Code, which is a different code than we're talking about today, deals with 1 and 2 family. And due to our state law and the way they define a commercial building, and by the way, a commercial building is defined as having met one of the following. First one is a place of employment. Second one is a place where the public egresses or ingresses in or out of a public building. And the third one is a building that has 3 tenants or more. Now that last one's a little awkward, but what it tries to do is separate the multifamily from the 1 and 2 dwelling code. So this basically kind of addresses your condominiums, your apartments, your townhouses, etc. And that's how in Wisconsin, we identify multifamily buildings as commercial rather than residential. Again, makes it unique here in Wisconsin. Another reason, in lieu of the laws of the state, that we have Wisconsin amendments is that certain things have proven themselves over the years that due to our 111 years of experience, we know certain actions can be taken and they'll work, okay? And one of the other items that a lot of people don't really realize is that the Wisconsin amendments, the vast majority actually reduce the requirements as published in the ICC codes, about 80% of them. So it's actually an advantage of sorts to the design and the contracting community. I remind everyone that the Wisconsin Commercial Building Code is a minimum set of requirements for the health, safety, welfare of the people of Wisconsin. The code is not a design manual, although some people think it is. Said in a more frank way, you cannot have a building design any worse than the minimums of the Wisconsin Commercial Building Code legally. Wow. All right, let's see what we can do here. Having said all that, let's move forward, get into the topic at hand. I got to do a little few changes here on the back side. I'm going to move you to the main screen here. Hopefully you'll be able to see that. If I could get confirmation from Gary or Justin, I'd appreciate that you can see the screen.
You can see the screen, but right now you're floating. So the
Oh, I'm
screen's
floating. Well, look at that. How can that happen? Let's see what we can do about that. How's that?
Perfect.
All right, let me. All right. So having said that, we're going to start here with our presentation. And again, I want to emphasize, we're only going to be looking at the Wisconsin amendments. We aren't going to look at the main topic of the I-codes themselves as published. So this is just Wisconsin amendments. Now, the adoption of the code, as many of you've heard through discussions and other highlights, has recently been pushed forward. The history behind it is that it's been reviewed by the Commercial Building Code Committee, and that public hearing dates were then held in April of 2023. The public hearing was then, commentary was then reviewed, and maybe some items modified within the proposed code. The final proposed version of the code was then directed to the legislature for their approval and adoption. When it got there, the legislature chose to hold it. It has been released, and at this time, the implementation date will be September 1st. Now, I want to make clear that at this time, there is no final version of the Wisconsin amendments. That's because it has to go through the Legislative Revisers Bureau, and until they give their rubber stamp, there is no final version. When they publish it, and they won't publish it before the implementation date, that'll be the final copy. They will issue it for public viewing on September 1st. Don't be looking for it beforehand. You can see preliminary versions, but please note that's not the final version. So the version that we sent to the LRB or to the legislature, those are still preliminary versions. They will give you a pretty good insight as to what the amendments are. The LRB makes sure that if there's a table, and we reference table 104, that there indeed is a table 104 to reference and apply. So the LRB just makes sure the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. Now, again, everything I'm going to talk about today is what we know at this time. It's preliminary, but at least give you an idea of where the department is heading and some of the thoughts and intentions of the department. I'm not going to look at every single amendment. There's been amendments there that have been there since the beginning of the ICC adoption. We're not looking at those. We're only looking at the amendments that have been changed or modified. In some cases, the amendments may be relocated because of the numbering scheme, but the amendment itself hasn't changed. We're not going to worry about those. Again, we're looking at where application of the code has been uniquely changed. So the big question, how do I know when to apply the 2015 code versus the 2021 code? Well, let's start and keep it simple and think about a new building, okay? From the department standpoint, we are going to apply the code in place at the time that you submit plans, complete plans. Don't give us napkins that were PDF'd on the computer. We need complete plans. We need, if you need footing and foundation, that could be a complete plan. That would be initiation of a project. We need the plans, the calcs, the specifications as appropriate. On the other hand, if you don't give us complete plans, we probably aren't going to recognize it. Now, when you submit those plans, we'll determine which code gets applied. So if the implementation date, the amendments will be out on September 1st, but the department has determined that the magic date is October 1st. Once plans, if plans are submitted to the department as a complete plan set prior to October 1st, then that plan set will be reviewed under the 2015 code. And since it initiates the project, the entire project falls under the 2015. So for instance, if you had footing and foundations that were submitted to the department as a complete plan set before October, and in follow-up, the building plans come, say, November, the heating plans come in February, maybe the sprinkler plans come in May of next year, all of that entire project still falls under the rules as related to the 2015 I-codes. On the other hand, if you submit plans on October 1st or later, that project initiation will identify that entire project will be required to follow the 2015 or 2021 code. I'm sorry, my fault. 2021 code and its amendments. Now, project initiation is really important because that's going to identify which code it is. But I also want to point out that for those of you who have used our preliminary consultation service, that doesn't initiate the project because I've had consultations and the project hasn't come in for years. So it's only when the plans are received, and it needs to be a valid plan submittal, that will start to go back and forth between the 2015 and the 2021, depending on when received. In the month of September, there may be scenarios where some design firms may want to submit using the 2021 code as the means of code compliance. And in the month of September, you can do that. You need to clearly identify that on the plan and in the plan submittal so that the reviewer knows that was your intent. Failing that, we will assume that the plans that are submitted will be based on the 2015 ICC codes. And so, as I said, you know, if you get in before October 1st with a complete plan initiating the project, everything that ensues will be under the 2015 code. You can see here that, you know, HVAC, kitchen hoods, precast, truss, lighting, fire suppression, fire alarm, likely being submitted at a later time or being addressed at a later time, still would follow the 2015 code. Okay. Now there are scenarios where you have a shell right? A simple box. We're going to build a box. Not sure what's going to go in the box, but we're going to build a box. Now, those plans, as submitted to the department, will be based on when we receive them, and we'll assume it's 2015 unless told otherwise if it's before October 1st. When the building starts getting finished out on the interior to accommodate new tenants, the tenant plans will be looked at and addressed by the code in place at the time that those tenant plans are received. So if I had a shell and I submitted the building plans for the shell in September 15th, we went ahead and we're under the 2015 code. We complete our box or shell. And come December, we got our first tenant and the tenant plans come in. Well, those plans are after October 1st. Those plans fall under the 2021 code. And so all the ensuing plans related to that tenant space, so you got building plans, heating plans, maybe sprinkler and fire alarm plans, truss, whatever it may be, who knows? Anything related to that particular part of the project would then fall under the 2021 code. Okay. Now we still have some situations where you have some standalone plans. Like for instance, you might want to change out your heating system. You're not going to do any changes to the building. It's strictly a heating system replacement. Or maybe the fire suppression system is going to be modified, or maybe the fire alarm system is going to be updated, right? It's a school. So if you have a standalone plan where there's really no building related or other projects related to it, the submittal of that plan, and I'll use a kitchen hood as an example where you're going to add a kitchen hood to an existing building. It's a standalone plan. When we receive it, if it's before October 1st, we will assume you want the 2015 code. We'll apply the 2015 code for that review. If you submit it on October 1st or later, it's going to be the 2021 code, which is applicable. Again, in the month of September, there's this kind of a gray area here. If you want to go to the 2021 code, you certainly can. You need to identify that when you submit your plans, and we'll review it based on that 2021 I code. Now, if you have the code books, if you're not familiar with the I code books, basically, if you see a solid line, there's some technical changes that were made. It could be big, could be small, but there was something to keep your eye on as you open your I code books. If you see an arrow, it basically implies something was removed. Okay, they took it out. Now, one of the items that I can tell you from the IBC, and I don't want to get too much involved in the actual printed version, but fire separation distance, which formerly was in IBC table 602, is no longer in 602. It's in chapter 7. It's been relocated. So you'll find a deletion mark there. And when you go to chapter 7, it's going to say, hey, it's been relocated. And if it's relocated, what you're going to find is an asterisk. Okay. And that's going to tell you, hey, something has been relocated here. All right. Now, as we move into the 2021 codes, you need to have the right materials at your disposal. And depending if you're a building designer, a heating designer, etc., things are going to vary. Of course, you're going to have sprinkler designers and fire alarm system designers, truss designers, on it goes. So the first thing to have is obviously just have the books. 2021 ICC, IBC, all the I codes, and the IFC, the International Fire Code, as referenced. Okay, and we'll get into that here a little later as to the application of the International Fire Code. The amendments, which we're going to talk about here, I still haven't gotten there yet, but we're still framing it, will be in 361 to 366. And again, I will say a final version will not be available until September 1. You can find preliminaries, but they are just that. They're preliminary, just like this presentation is based on the preliminary. It is not the final because we don't have a final yet. The department doesn't have it. It's with the LRB. Now, the next item is the ANSI A117.1 accessible and usable buildings and facilities. I greatly encourage you to get a copy of this. The size of the bathrooms have increased. Imagine that. They've gotten larger to create greater accessibility. And this is an important issue when you're designing buildings because most every building has to have a toilet room with few exceptions. So if you aren't aware of the new size and clearance requirements for bathrooms, you really need to get a copy of the accessibility A117.1 2017 because there's some significant changes in that particular standard. Additionally, then there's NFPA 54 for the National Fuel Gas Code. Now, it's a little awkward to say TBD. Our intent is to apply the 2021. We're not sure, there's some issues at hand, and LRB is going to give us some guidance as to what is or isn't at this time. Like I say, the intent is to apply the 2021 NFPA 54 standard. Keep your eyes and ears open on this. ASHRAE 90.1 2019 would be the baseline of the 2021 IECC code. It is an option for the design group. If you choose, you can use the IECC, the Energy Conservation Code, as published, or you can choose to go to ASHRAE 90.1, which some national groups would like to have their buildings designed to. That's an option, and it's perfectly viable. Some other items that you need to be aware of is the ASCE 7 2016. They changed the wind loads. The calculations come out very similar, but they aren't the same. And the wind velocities, etc., need to be on the plans, as it's always been the case. So make sure you obtain that and do the appropriate calculations. I remind everyone, if you have computer programming that's based on an earlier version of ASCE 7, for example, for structural design, don't submit them with a 2021 building plan. They're not any good. They don't comply with this standard. It's the previous one. It was ASCE 7 2010. It's like applying the ICC code from 2000. No, you're not allowed to do that. So if you don't have up-to-date calculations, you're going to have to do a lot of hand calcs. I strongly encourage you to think ahead on that and take actions as you see appropriate. Another standard is the Fire Resistance and Sound Control Design Manual. If you don't have it, this is a really good manual. It's great if you need fire ratings. UL, which obviously everyone's aware of, has many different fire rated designs online, but they're sometimes very difficult to read. This is a very nice condensed version with a multitude of design options. Certainly UL is viable, Gypsum Board Association, and tested listed assemblies. All of those are valid, but it's nice to have a bunch in one site that you can look up. So a very good standard. For the wood design group, ANSI AWD NDS 2018 is now the standard. And I do want to point out that in my efforts, as it involved the review of the commercial building inspector exam, so as to complement the 2021 code, we found that there were some questions as it involved header design that the answers changed. And because of the NDS standard here, what was formerly 2x10s was required to go to 2x12s. So this could change some of your project design. I'm trying to warn you ahead of time. Make sure you get the standard and use the new values for the strength of wood. Additionally, beyond wood, we also have those that relate to concrete and steel buildings, ASC 318 and AISC 360, which are basically the main references for the design of both concrete and steel. And of course, those have been updated also. And for those of you who are involved in building envelope and insulating a building, we have recognized ASHRAE Fundamentals 2021. So if you unsure of the R value of, say, a wall assembly, a ceiling assembly, some baselines as to overhead doors and windows and some justifications for that. ASHRAE is a wonderful place to go for series parallel methods in determination of R values of various assemblies. So those are the materials that would be very handy to have. I would almost say essential in some of the efforts that you as designers and contractors perform. There is some licensing that came with this adoption, and it basically is directed to those who perform inspections relating to fire detection, prevention, suppression devices. Typically, these licenses have been obtained by fire department officials, so that they're not necessarily, usually a fire department official is not necessarily a commercial building inspector, but because they go in on their yearly inspections on behalf of the community to verify existing commercial buildings and their compliance, making sure the exit lights are lit, properly located, that there's clearances in front of the electrical boards, that the doors have operational hardware, and in some cases verifying fire dampers, smoke dampers, etc., all properly installed and been properly maintained. So this new license under 305-627 provides them that opportunity to verify and do inspections while they're performing their yearly fire verifications, as well as those who are commercial building inspectors who also can verify those various fire assemblies. Now, finally, to the code we go. So there were some changes made to the state statutes which exempts certain buildings, and in this case, we did add a note recognizing that the statute was modified. This particular code section, this includes buildings located on research or laboratory farms of public universities or other state institutions and used primarily for housing livestock or other ag purposes under 101.05. Additionally, there's another reference here, and it says rural school buildings under the conditions set by the state statute. A rural school building, as referenced in this part of the statute, which would be exempt from application of the commercial building code, would be a rural school consisting of a single room as addressed and owned by a bona fide religious denomination, and whose religion was such that it would such actions of the commercial code may interfere with the use of that particular building. So that's the second exemption here. And we now have it as a note for your reference when you apply the code. We have another exemption that's been included. It kind of goes from the homeschool standpoint. We've added an exception I, a microschool. Microschool for 8 or fewer students enrolled in a pre-kindergarten through grade 12 if the school is located in a home or a dwelling that falls under the scope of SPS 320.02, which is the Uniform Dwelling Code for 1 and 2 family dwellings here in the state of Wisconsin. So this is another exemption that the department has incorporated. There's been a lot of talk and discussion on temporary use of buildings. Here it's displayed a wedding barn, okay? And you've always, those of you who've heard me talk before, we have talked about wedding barns on multiple occasions, and there was a lot of question about the application of this particular section of the code because the way it was worded, and it was worded this time frame may not exceed 180 days. Well, the department's intent was always that it be 180 consecutive days, although the language didn't imply it. So there was a kind of a gray area here. So now we've clarified that clearly, if somebody wants to use a building in a temporary way, you can do that. You can do it for 180 days. And the official, this would be the local official because it's temporary. This is, if it's permanent, you can come to us, but when it's temporary, you always go to the local official. If you're going to go through the local building inspector and or the fire department. It's good for 180 days. Note that the official may grant extensions if you can demonstrate cause, and if you've worked with them, needless to say, that will certainly help your cause. The International Fire Code. Now, we don't necessarily adopt the International Fire Code per se. You notice I made reference to it. But what's important is that if there's a directional signal, and there's many in the International Building Code that reference the fire code, you then are obligated to use the fire code if this section says you can. So in other words, this is an intermediary location in the code, 36103 parens 14, that before going from the building code and applying the fire code, you have to see if that section of the fire code has been recognized, for instance, as it involves design and construction or occupant loads, or as we see in the ensuing ones, some other sections. So you're going to find in the building code, if there's a reference to the fire code, you go to the fire code, find out where that discussion is held, what chapter, you come back to this section to see if that section of the fire code is listed. If so, then you're obligated to apply the fire code. I can give you one example here for many of you who are involved in very large warehouses. If you have high piled combustible storage, high piled combustible storage over 12 feet is addressed under 413 the building code, and it tells you to go to the fire code. And you'll find that in this section, it does identify that section of the fire code for use in design and construction, and thus the design professionals out there are obligated to design their commercial building to include the design and construction requirements of the fire code. A lot to say there, but hopefully you kind of grasped it. Now, within the fire code here, again, we have design and construction and the various IFC sections. I didn't list them here because it's just a long itinerary of sections. The second grouping is occupant loads addressed under IFC 10056. Well, it's very similar to those that you find in the IBC in 1004. Moving ahead, construction inspections and reports shall apply that are addressed in the IFC, because remember, that's the fire code, so they're into inspections and reports. Note that the department has added, but may be performed or compiled by any qualified agency rather than by a special inspector. Now, the ICC code has licenses at the national level that they provide for those who are qualified for special inspections. Many of you have known that since the adoption of the I-Code since 2002, we have typically omitted the special inspection sections of the code. Moving into the 2021 adoption, Chapter 17 of the International Building Code, which addresses special inspections, is now included with the adoption of the 2021 codes. Now, it's always been a chicken or the egg kind of thing. Do you create licenses such that you create licenses for professionals but not have code language to justify their use? Or do you create code language and then work on the licenses on the back side? Well, in this particular case, with the adoption of Chapter 17, we've created the rules, and at this time, we will be looking at individuals who are qualified to perform those actions. So for instance, to verify welds, obviously you should have a AWS license. It's not explicit at this point. We'll give some guidance as this moves forward. It'll be new for all of us, both from the designer standpoint and from the inspection standpoint. But the intent is all positive, right? Special inspections provide verification that the concrete is appropriate. They're going to do slump tests. They're going to take core tests. They're going to check the steel. They're going to check the wood framing, etc. There's some exceptions, and we'll get into that. But I want to emphasize that there are special inspector requirements included with the adoption of this code. So not only do we have the inspections from the IFC if required, and again, it would have to be a listed section in this area. You have use and operation provisions that may also be required to be addressed, assuming that the building code requires it to go to the fire code, and that fire code section is listed under 36103(14). Again, that's nothing new. All requirements that specify obtaining a permit or certificate of occupancy. This global deletion does not in any way restrict the power of local municipality to require a certificate of occupancy. As many of you know, the state of Wisconsin doesn't issue a permit or certificate of occupancy. We haven't, and I don't see it coming in any near future. However, the local municipalities may choose by local ordinance to require that a permit be obtained or a certificate of occupancy prior to anyone using the building. And this is to clarify that although the state of Wisconsin is not going to be issuing an occupancy permit, the locals can, and if they feel that the building is not safe, it's not completed, that various items for use of the building haven't been provided, and with special inspections, that could be some paperwork and testing, they won't issue that occupancy permit. This gives them empowers them to do that. Inspection and testing, okay, as it involves smoke dampers, fire dampers, ceiling radiation dampers, all those wonderful dampers out there are all under NFPA 1, NFPA 80, NFPA 105. It needs to be conducted by a person with current fire life safety certification from a program accredited by the American National Standards Institute, the ANSI group. Now, just to clarify, anytime you see in the building code reference to the International Plumbing Code, we don't adopt the International Plumbing Code. So by definitions here in our state and in the Commercial Building Code, we're referencing the Wisconsin Plumbing Code. If you see reference to the International Private Sewage Code, again, we're looking at the Wisconsin Plumbing Code and the Private On-Site Wastewater Treatment Systems Code. And if you see reference to the IRC, the International Residential Code, the intent there is to be referencing the Uniform Dwelling Code here in Wisconsin. Okay, so just keep that in mind as you review and apply the Commercial Building Code. Definitions. One of the new pieces of language is modular commercial building element. Many of you are aware of modular buildings. In the past, the state statutes actually had multifamily buildings and commercial buildings separate, and they were treated as two separate codes. Several years ago, they combined the two to treat it as one, which is the way we enforce it anyway. Our former language had basically the commercial buildings and the multifamily. They were very similar in that they were almost mirror images of one another. And what we did this time around with the building code is we combined them both and expanded and clarified the modular commercial building elements as to what's required, how to address them, etc. Lastly, multifamily dwelling, we have a definition in our state statute. So rather than looking at the International Building Code, we maintain the law of the state and reference the state's definition of a multifamily dwelling. 36105 recognizes that the 2021 ICC codes as listed there are to be adopted for use in the state of Wisconsin, and they will be amended by chapters 362 through 366 respectively. So this is where the 2021 gets specifically identified and the fact that the amendments also need to be addressed. We jump to the plan approval portion of the code. Now, the way the code starts out, it says every building, commercial building shall have plans submitted and conditionally approved. I mean, that's the start. And then it steps back and says, by the way, here's some exceptions. Added to those exceptions is the following: a single-story building and structure of less than 1,000 square feet located on individual parcels or lease sites at Wisconsin State Fair Park. In this case, Wisconsin State Fair Park is specifically for the one in Milwaukee. So if you are working on that type of building down in the Milwaukee area, there is now this exception for you to apply for your project. Permit to start. Okay, now we really haven't changed anything about a permit to start. You still can obtain them. It still costs you $75. You need to submit a plan at the time of the request of the permit to start. It needs to be a complete plan. And note that a permit to start only addresses footing and foundation. Don't use it to build anything above grade. You can't use a permit to start putting in a heating equipment above grade. You can't use it to put in new fire suppression, fire alarm into an existing building above grade. No, no, no. The permit to start is for footings and foundations only. If it doesn't involve footing and foundations, don't get a permit to start because it's not applicable to your particular situation. What we did for a change here in this section of the code is recognize that for very large, significant, say, box store type businesses, you're not going to get to the president of a national entity. It's just not going to happen. But they have multiple representatives who could sign off. So what we did is we modified this section to recognize that not only would we accept the building owner signing off, but on those, unique scenarios, we would also recognize the building owner's representative. And now that's clarified here in this amendment. A big one for many of you who are involved in system changes, alterations, if you have alterations, instead of getting an approval good for 1 year, the approval for building alterations and of course related alterations, HVAC, fire protection, smoke detection, fire suppression, they'll be good for 2 years. So we're extending it from 1 year to 2 years for an alteration. Now note, if you need another year, there is the ability to extend a plan out for an additional year under 361.36 parens 2. But note, you must, notice there is no wiggle room in this discussion. You must notify the department before the plans expire. Don't come to the department after the plans expired and say, hey, we want to extend the use of this plan. We won't do it because there's no plan to extend. It's expired. You can't extend an expired plan. But the important point here is that we're going from 1 year to 2 year for alterations as submitted to the department, starting with the adoption of the 2021 codes. We had talked about the modular commercial building elements definition, and these are the sections in which it's now located. And it addresses the manufacture, the sale, the installation of modular commercial building elements, compliance assurance program, installation, approval procedures, on and on. The value of a modular commercial building element, as you can see here, is you could build this box in a factory under controlled conditions. You don't have to worry about the rain. You don't have to worry about 20 below wind chill factor. You don't have to worry about all the elements that go on the outside. You can build this in the factory. You throw it on the back end of an 18-wheeler. You get your crane and you put them together out in the field and you tie them all together with the appropriate fasteners and you're off to the races. That's the value of modular commercial building elements. Now when we adopted the 2015 codes, we had an addition to it that allowed for the design group to choose to apply a more modern edition of the international codes. So for instance, we were in the 2015. If you wanted to apply the 2021, 2024, 2018 even ICC codes, this section would allow you to do it. Be aware, however, but if you want a more advanced or newer version of the code for application, you may not use any of the Wisconsin amendments. You have to apply the code as written, no exception. We did have a few of these, that's fine. We clarified what the fees are for using a alternate code, and now we've identified that now within the language here in the administrative portion of Chapter 361. So as you see, you want a new approval. We got an arrow there off to the left. New approval. And then we're going to go to an alternate standard, and the cost will be $1,200. Certified municipalities, obviously those delegated municipalities and or counties have obligations that they can fulfill, but they're also limited in how much effort they can take out in the field, depending if they're just delegated or a second-class city, maybe a first-class city. Milwaukee's the only first-class city in the state of Wisconsin. The language here says plan examinations allowed. So if you're a delegated municipality, you're allowed to perform plan review as it involves an alteration to a space involving less than 100,000 cubic feet volume. This is to complement changes in the statutes as it involves inspection. And so the language was changed in the administrative code to complement the statutes. The code now has new definitions for fuel burning appliance, high piled combustible storage, sealed combustion appliance, and a toilet room. There's always been discussion, especially when dealing with fire department buildings. Commercial motor vehicle has the meaning given in the state statutes 340.018, but does not include a fire apparatus. And you're like, well, what's the big deal here? Well, if you have a fire department and you have multiple fire apparatus, right? A lot of fire trucks. If you treated it as a commercial motor vehicle, then under 903.210.1, it would require that the building be sprinklered at 5,000 feet of fire area. If you exceeded that 5,000 foot fire area threshold, sprinklering would be required. Because of the recognition that the fire apparatus is not a commercial motor vehicle, then that area, that fire area, could be as large as 12,000 feet without being required to be sprinklered, right? It takes on the persona of a general vehicle rather than a commercial vehicle. So that's the value of that particular definition. Aircraft hangars, now we clarified the surface in those buildings. Floor surfaces shall be made of materials allowed by 406.2.4. And I'm sure you probably don't remember what it is, but in general, it requires that concrete or similar approved non-combustible, non-absorbent materials be used for the floor of the aircraft hangar. This is an important change, and I don't think it's going to change the design at all. It's just a great clarification between the application of the Commercial Building Code and the application of the Uniform Dwelling Code. Again, the Uniform Dwelling Code is for 1 and 2 family dwellings. Once you get to 3, remember that definition of 3 tenants or more becomes a commercial building. Now you're in the Commercial Building Code. There are scenarios where the UDC and the Commercial Building Code butt heads. I'll give you an example. I have a Taverine on the first floor, and I have a single dwelling unit on top. This is very common in some of the old town main streets. Now, the shell of that building is technically under the Commercial Building Code. The finish out of the Taverine, or the tavern for those of you more common, is under the Commercial Building Code. It's either going to be a business occupancy or it's going to be an A2 occupancy if it has 50 or more individuals. The upstairs, however, doesn't meet the criteria of a commercial building. All right, the upstairs is not a place of employment. It's a one dwelling unit. So it's not a place of employment. It's not a place where the public egresses or ingresses, like a basketball forum. And there's not 3 dwelling units or 3 tenants, if you will, in this building. So that tenant space on the upstairs falls under the Uniform Dwelling Code. Now for height and area, we need to put something in. So when we establish height and area, we'll call it R3 from a commercial side, just to verify height and area, which is, it's not very restrictive. But for code purposes, as a reviewer, I don't enforce the commercial code on the interior finish out of the UDC. Now, in that circumstance, if you were to build a new building, okay, you need to have a separation of fire rated, either horizontal assembly. In this case, the example I gave you had the residence upstairs and we have the tavern downstairs. That horizontal floor assembly needs to have a 1 hour rating because we have to separate the residence from the commercial tenant. Or if you might go left to right, the fire partition now through this language is got to be a 1 hour fire partition. It's 1 hour, but it turns out to be a fire partition under 708. So keep that in mind. And the reason this is important, because the UDC doesn't match up. The UDC does allow a less than a full hour fire rated assembly between UDC and the adjacent commercial space. Please note, this rule is more restrictive than what's written in the UDC. So if you have this unique situation where you have a UDC use immediately adjacent to some kind of commercial tenant, right? Because this is the only way that's going to happen. The commercial code is more restrictive, requires a full 1 hour assembly, and that's the application. And if in case you're wondering, well, how do I know that? There's 2 different rules here. In SPS 36103, parens 3, it's titled conflicts. And it says if there's a conflict, and there's different types, there's ones that we'll talk about, one being more specific than another. While this is a commercial code versus UDC, so that both written by the department, they're pretty equitable. In that case, the most restrictive requirement is applied. So that's how we come to the conclusion. We now have added another option for the design community. We've recognized it, we just didn't have it in writing, so we've now put it in writing. Many times you get a firewall and you don't get a nice 180-degree break at the corner of the firewall. Maybe it's only 90 degrees. Then you have to do something more. And you have to comply with one of the following. And these 2 are written in the code. The first one talks about exterior walls on both sides of the firewall have at least a 1 hour fire rating with a minimum 4-foot extension on each side. The second one deals with the idea that you're going to treat it as 2 separate buildings, put basically a imaginary lot line between the buildings, and then apply 705.8 for openings, etc., between the buildings. Well, this is what's written in the code, and what we did is we added a third option. The firewall can simply be extended 4 more feet in one direction. And you say, well, we already talked about 4-foot extension. Yeah, we did, but that 4-foot extension in one is a 1 hour rating in 2 directions. The firewall that we're talking about is going to be at least 2, could be as much as 4 hours, and you're going to extend that for 4 feet in any one direction. So let's see if this picture will help at all. So here's the first example, right? Here's my firewall. This is an exterior wall here. All right. The firewall ends. So we don't have 180 degrees, so we're going to have to fire rate these 4 feet out in both directions, consisting of a 1 hour fire rated assembly. And if by chance there's an opening, it would require a 3/4 opening protection, 45-minute rated door, 45-minute rated window, etc. So that's the first example. It's still been in the code, continues to be in the code. This is a second example. Again, already been in the code. You basically have an imaginary lot line. Okay, you're going to put it between. Here's my firewall. It ends right here. It's my firewall right there. Firewall, it's going to come up. It's going to stop. Well, we don't have 180 degrees. We're going to have to do some unique fire ratings. So we're going to apply what formerly used to be table 602, fire separation distance, and we're going to fire rate them accordingly out to whatever distances that table, which is now in chapter 7, and I don't have it memorized. I apologize. I haven't used the 2021 code all that much. But we're going to fire rate this out, as you can see, coming out accordingly based on the distance from the lot line, right? That's your second option. And it's, as far as the amount of openings that can be placed in this wall, again, because of the distance from the lot line, in this case, it's an imaginary lot line, A, B, and C will either be no openings, 15%, or maybe 25% openings. What the new option here is I'm going to have my firewall, and normally it would stop here, but we're going to use the new option, and I'm going to extend it just 4 more feet. Here's my exterior walls. I'm just going to extend it 4 more feet. Now, a firewall is never anything less than 2 hours. So this firewall is either going to be 2 hour, 3 hour, or 4 hour, and it's extend 4 more feet in any one direction, and you don't have to do anything to the opposite exterior wall. I think the design community will like that. It's now been clarified and input into the code, and it'll be a value added, I think, in the big picture. For the heating guys, I haven't left you out. There's an advantage that's been placed into the building code. It's more of a clarification because the language just didn't address what's in the IRC because we don't adopt the International Residential Code. We adopt the Uniform Dwelling Code. And because nationally, row houses, townhouses, condos, apartments are many times placed in the International Residential Code. We missed out on this and it wasn't in the building code. So we've now included it by Wisconsin amendment. So if you have a building, all right, say a townhouse, it's 3 stories. I put the furnace on the bottom story, and now I penetrate the floor ceiling assembly between the basement and the first, and now the floor ceiling assembly between the second and first and the second. So we got basement, first, second. We got 3 stories. Well, the code is written technically says you need to have a shaft, even though it's entirely within the same townhouse. There was no exception written in the code. So we've created an amendment, and it says as follows. Ducts contained within individual dwelling units may connect up to 3 stories without a fire-rated shaft. The annular space around the penetrating duct shall be protected with an approved non-combustible material that resists the free passage of flame and the products of combustion, i.e. smoke. Okay, so this will, I think, address some issues that we've had challenges on for some of the residential townhouses. If you have non-fire resistant rated floor assemblies, fire dampers or smoke dampers are not required in Group I2 duct penetrations of smoke barriers in fully ducted HVAC systems. Sprinklering language, as you know, we have a lot of amendments for sprinklering, and many of them were driven by petitions for variance. We had numerous petitions for variance as it involved rural located A2 occupancies, assembly occupancies for eating and drinking. We've had exceptions for a lot of petitions for residential occupancies out in the rural area where it's very difficult to get the sprinkler system, etc. There's some real challenges there. So we have tried to accommodate some of those petitions and just put them into the code so that it's the same and we don't have to process them and you know what the requirements are. So that's some of the history behind it. There's also other reasons based on some actions that have been taken here recently. So the first one of discussion here is the fire area containing an A1 occupancy has no stories that include a level of discharge. So if you have this situation, you need to sprinkler the building. The fire area containing the A1 occupancy has no stories that include a level of exit discharge. You'd be required to have sprinklers installed. A1 is a performance area, like a theater. And the same language has now been incorporated in for use for the A2, which is eating and drinking, as well as the A3, which is your general assembly occupancy, such as a church. And again, this drives the need for sprinklering. There's been some changes to schools, K through 12, and sometimes even younger than the kindergarten, if you meet the right criteria. Instead of 20,000 feet being the threshold for sprinklering, that threshold has been changed to 12,000 square feet. So if your fire area is 12,000 feet or greater, you'll need to sprinkler that educational occupancy. The other driving force for an educational building is if the Group E fire area has an occupant load of 300 or more. So if you trigger either one of these, you now need to sprinkler that E occupancy. The sprinkling language for residential, there's been several exceptions to a full-blown sprinkler system. This is one of them, and it really hasn't changed the language. It just changed one item, and you can see that here in red, that this particular exception in the code to sprinklering a building with, say, a 13 or 13R system allowed the use of an NFPA 13D, or if you will, a domestic water system. And we formally allowed up to 20 or more, not more than 20 dwelling units. And that now has been reduced to 4. All the other criteria hasn't changed. So if you have 4 or less, it's multifamily, the building's not more than 2 stories above grade plane, and there's no municipal water, the department will allow you to use a 13D system instead of 13 or 13R NFPA system for sprinklering. Continuing forward, more into more specialty types of areas, Group R and Group R4, Condition 1. Condition 1, by the way, is those areas, kind of a group home of sorts, capable of self-preservation without assistance. Those occupancies in townhouses meeting the separation requirements listed in 1 and 2 below shall be permitted to be installed throughout in accordance with a 13D domestic system. Now, the 2 criteria is that a townhouse is 3 stories or less above grade, and that each dwelling unit within the townhouse is separated from other dwelling units by at least 1 hour fire-resistant rated separation per IBC 707, which is the fire barrier section of the code. There is now a recognition for townhouses. Townhouses meeting the definition in Chapter 2 and satisfying both 1 and 2 below may be constructed without a sprinkler system. Sounds like a good deal. So it has to meet the definition of a townhouse, and then it has to meet 1 and 2. 1, the townhouse is less than 2 stories above grade plane. If you're 3, you cannot use this exception. If you're 1 or 2, you can. Secondly, each dwelling unit within the townhouse is separated from other dwelling units by at least 2 hour fire-rated separation walls constructed in accordance to the IBC 706, which is the firewall criteria. The separation wall does not have to comply with the structural stability requirements of IBC 706-2. In other words, that you have the breakaway roof and breakaway floor capability from a firewall. Okay. Now, what's important about this is the note that's attached to it. Note, exceptions to sprinkler requirements found in 101.14, that deals with 2 hour separation of multifamily dwelling units. And this section only apply to the sprinkler section of the code and do not affect other sections of 361 to 366. Why is that an important note? Well, again, we're not going to sprinkle the building. The whole point here of this exception is not to sprinkle the building. Okay, you're not sprinkling the building. But when you go to table 1006.2.1, okay, 1006.2.1 in the building code, that tells you egress. And one of the issues for residents is that for egress, there is no common path of travel if the building isn't sprinklered. So thus, your common path becomes an issue. And so you're going to need 2 ways out of every room except a bathroom in order to apply this particular code requirement. Now, if it's a 1-story residential space, a dwelling unit, it's not a big deal. But if you have a 2-story, you need 2 exits out of every room. That gets to be a bit more challenging. Moving ahead, there's been sprinkler language added to clarify how to deal with balconies, decks, etc., that extend beyond the normal building, right? Very common on the residential side. Sprinkler protection complying with NFPA 13 shall be provided for exterior balconies, decks, and ground floor patios of dwelling units where the building is of type 5 construction. If there's a roof or deck above, so now I got a deck, and so then maybe there's another deck above, or maybe there's a deck and the roof has got a substantial overhang, right? Or where exterior balconies, decks, and ground floor patios of dwelling units and sleeping units are constructed in accordance with IBC 705-231, exception 3. Now that exception 3 says that if you have a type 3, which is construction type 3, type 4, which is the heavy timber, and 5, type 5, which is stick lumber, construction using type 5 construction. In other words, even though you're a type 3, type 4 construction, this section of the code will allow you to use type 5 construction for the balcony. Should you have that scenario, sidewall sprinklers that are used to protect such areas shall be permitted to be located such that their deflectors are within 1 inch to 6 inches below the structural members and a maximum distance of 14 inches below the deck of the exterior balconies and decks that are constructed of open wood joist construction. So this is to provide guidance for those unique scenarios where you need to extend the sprinklers to those decks and balconies. For those of you who may not know the definition, there is a lot of discussion about access to municipal water in the code, because obviously if you don't have access to municipal water and you need to have a sprinkler system, that can be quite challenging. So we've defined what a municipal water system is, and we've gone on that if municipal water system isn't available, we've provided some exceptions and the requirements that can be used to meet those exceptions so as to not have a sprinkler system. So this here gives you some guidance as to what a municipal water system is. Here's an example for an A2 occupancy. A2 again is eating and drinking. So if you're out in the rural area and you don't have access to municipal water, you might not need to sprinkler if you can meet all of the following. So A says the building's limited to a single A2 occupancy fire area, and it can't exceed now 5,000 feet. Used to be 12. It's now been changed. The occupant load has been reduced from 200 or from 300 to 200. Building height, that language is still the same. Minimum of 3 exits, again, that language is the same. It was added, though, a 5th item. Basements and windowless stories must still adhere to the provisions of IBC 903-211. And what that section says is if you have a windowless story, you must sprinkler that windowless story unless you meet one of the exceptions listed in that section. So that's an add-on. This section is very similar to what it was in the past, but it has been changed. So be aware of it as you go forward with your design. In a similar fashion, instead of A2, we have some exceptions for the group R occupancy if you don't have municipal water. The building has to be used less than 180 days. Now, this is specifically for camp. So if you have residential camp buildings and you use it less than 180 days, a lot of camps are usually summer camps, so the 180 days probably be pretty easy to meet. So the criteria, building used less than 180 days per calendar year. And the second criteria is the building is limited to a single fire area no greater than 2,500 square feet. And as a clarification, the department has added a note to the code that says that the restrooms serving the cabin are considered as part of the R occupancy for the application of this code section. Because sometimes they're incorporated into the building, sometimes they may be outside the building in a different building. The occupant load has changed from 300 to 50. Now remember, we reduced the floor area from 12,000 to 2,500, so the occupant load was reduced to complement that. The fire area is located only on floors with exit discharge at grade. And in addition, they've been language added involving all sleeping rooms have a direct exit to the exterior. So if there's a fire, they don't have to go back into the building to get to the exit. They can leave their sleeping room directly to the outside with a direct exit. Additional requirements for exempted non-sprinklered buildings with no municipal water. Okay. Now, if you choose to meet those criteria with non-municipal water, every one of them has to meet this paren C. All right. It's an addition to, it's commonly missed. I'm telling you, don't miss it, because people like me then have to hold a plan, and I certainly don't want to do that. So this is an addition to the criteria that we just looked at. This would be over and above. The occupant loads displayed, okay, which is not a big deal, but it's important when dealing with assembly occupancies. All open flames, including smoking, shall be prohibited in the building and less than 50 feet from the building, except for flame equipment used to reheat and maintain food temperatures. Now, the idea is, remember, we're not allowing you to requiring you to put a sprinkler system into the building. So we have some prohibitions that we don't want to see. So for instance, if a church would choose not to sprinkle a rural building in the field, which if they meet the exception, that's fine. One of the criteria is they can't have open flames. There can be no candles. All right. Now, there's now been a addition for a note. In this section, open flame means a candle, solid fuel fireplace, or other similar flames. It does not refer to permanently installed listed fuel-fired heating and cooking equipment that was installed in compliance with all applicable building code requirements in effect at the time of installation. So we've clarified what is all open flames, because there was a lot of different interpretations of what the intent was. So open flames include candles, solid fuel fireplace, and other similar open flames. Again, as part of paren C, a smoke detection and fire alarm system is required to be installed. Remember, you're getting out of putting a full sprinkler system into the building, and as a substitute, the department's saying, look, you need to meet all of these other items. In this particular case, for an assembly A2, which is eating and drinking, you need to have smoke detection and fire alarm system installed. Okay. It's required to be installed in all interior spaces of the building. Automatic detection shall be extended to all combustible concealed spaces if automatic fire sprinkler protection would otherwise be required per IBC 903311. Automatic detection shall utilize smoke detectors unless ambient conditions prohibit such installation. In spaces where smoke detectors cannot be utilized due to the ambient conditions, approved automatic heat detectors shall be permitted. So it gives some options here, but again, this is in replacement of a sprinkler system. So look, there's no sprinkler system being required, but we're going to, in replace of that, we're going to ask that smoke detection and fire alarm system be installed. Now that was for an A2. This is for an R residential. It's very similar. Automatic detection is required to be installed in all interior spaces of the building. Automatic detection shall utilize smoke detectors unless ambient conditions prohibit such installation. In spaces where the smoke detectors can't be utilized due to ambient conditions, approved automatic heat detectors shall be permitted. So again, just providing you some insight and filling in the I's and dotting the T's. Other items, again, required when you choose to not sprinkle the building and where no municipal water is available, you need to have your fire extinguishers. And when the plans are submitted, again, when the plans are submitted, you need to have a form. Imagine that, the state of Wisconsin with a form. But we do have a form. And that form needs to be signed off by the fire code official if there's no commercial building inspector for the jurisdiction. That sign off is to be recognized for no sprinkler in the building. It also identifies that indeed there is no municipal water available. Now, if the locals don't feel that's appropriate for whatever reason, the representative, whether it's the building code official or if there is no building code official, it goes to the fire code official, they can make a comment on the form and say, no, we don't believe this should happen. We have some disagreement. We have concerns for life safety. Here's my reasons why. That form, as signed by either the building or the fire official, needs to be accompanied your building plan submittal. If it's not there, again, we'll hold it because we have to have that. Some other items of note, again, actually reduces the application of the code. Those stories without openings, right? Take a basement. A lot of times we have a basement, there's no opening. You maybe just got a single door on the far end. Code doesn't like that. Why? Because the fire department doesn't have access to spray their hose of water should there be a fire event. There are exceptions where if you have openings around the outside of the story without opening, that you would not be required to sprinkle that particular story. We've added another exception that windowless stories with all required exits provided directly at grade when the story is located at or above grade would be exempt of the need of a sprinkler system installation. Now, I've provided here from Jim Michak, he was kind enough to send me a picture of a recent membrane building. Needless to say, they don't have windows per se. They do have exit doors around the building, and if it doesn't meet the exception written in the code, it might be able to meet this exception so as to not sprinkler that particular space due to a windowless floor level. Woodworking operations, it really hasn't changed anything. It's just to clarify that the 2,500 square feet of area referenced in IBC 903-241 is the size of the woodworking area, and it's not the size of the fire area. The point being is the fire area could be up to 12,000 feet for a factory before a fire suppression system would be required to be installed. Within that 12,000 feet, you could have woodworking occurring in 2,500 square feet of that area without requiring sprinkler. Now, if it's 3,000 of the 12,000, and even though the 12,000 is less than the total fire area allowed for a factory, if the woodworking exceeds 2,500, you still have to sprinkler the space. So again, when you're dealing with woodworking, it's the area in which the woodworking is occurring, not the fire area in which the woodworking is occurring. We now have language for the situation in which you have boat storage, right? Where you take the boats and you put them on a multi-layer rack system for the wintertime, right? You take them out of the water. The language is as follows: says an automatic sprinkler system shall be provided throughout all buildings containing a group S1. So we're treating it as an S1 fire area used for the storage of boats in racks that the fire area exceeds 5,000. Now, don't get me wrong, there are aluminum boats, and you can see portions of aluminum here, but a lot of the boats are made out of fiberglass. So that's going to be an S1, not an S2 occupancy. Yes, it's motor vehicle, but there's a lot of fiberglass. We'll consider that an S1. And if you exceed the fire area of 5,000 feet, you do need to sprinkler those buildings. We did have to modify language as it involves an S2 parking garage. The reason this language was modified is because our definition of what a fire area is modified by Wisconsin amendment. In Wisconsin, we don't recognize The fire area being inclusive of areas under an open roof situation. Say you have a park shelter, right, with 4 poles on the corner. There's a roof, 4 poles. There is not a wall there. Based on the Wisconsin code, there is no fire area in that building. Okay, that's the definition. There's no closure. Got 4 posts holding up a roof. In a parking garage, we have no fire area due to Wisconsin's definition because there's no closure. So in order to appropriately apply the code, they put this amendment in, and it says where the building area of the open parking garage in accordance with IBC 406.5 exceeds 48,000 square feet, you then need to sprinkler the building. Okay. Distilled spirits and wine, a topic of my discussions on multiple occasions here in the last couple of years. This will help provide some guidance, especially to the sprinkler side. So let's see how this goes here. It says when the provisions of the chapters 361 to 366 require that a building or portion thereof be equipped with an automatic sprinkler system, according to the section, automatic fire sprinkler protection in buildings storing distilled spirits in wooden barrels or casks may be installed throughout the fire area containing this type of storage in accordance with an alternate design standard. And you can see here it's FM Ignitable Liquid Storage in Portable Containers 729, October 2020, with interim revision on January 2021. So it's pretty specific. Just some background here. NFPA 30, which is adopted through NFPA 13, of course that's the sprinkler code, in this circumstances via the IBC 903311. All right, so this is a lot to take in. The IBC gives you a directional signal to apply NFPA 13. NFPA 13 then gives a directional signal to apply NFPA 30. Unfortunately, NFPA 30 does not address within the scope of the standard the storage of wooden barrels and casks in these types of facilities. So this is the reason that the Farmers Mutual 729 was adopted for this unique code section. We did take some exceptions for the application of fire alarms when relating to elevator pits. You'll see that certain sections of NFPA 72 are not applicable if sprinklers are located in the same area. Bleacher fire alarm systems are not required for an open air bleacher with a maximum occupant load of 15,000, where the egress from the bleachers on the exterior does not re-enter a building to reach a public way. Now, this is my local high school. I took a picture of the football stadium. This is the home side. You can see there's bleachers both sides. Everything is on the exterior. It never goes underneath the building, never goes underneath the bleachers whatsoever. No fire alarm system required. As to fire department connections, and yes, there's a lot of references to them in the building code, rather than us dictate it because we're not there, we don't know what equipment they have, we don't know what kind of fire trucks they have and what their attachments are. This is to direct the code designer or the designer using the code to apply and work with the fire chief of the local municipality in which you're going to be placing these connections. That way you know specifically what equipment they have and what will work with their equipment. How appropriate for the sound background. The fire pumps. We do have some substitution of the wording. In IBC 913 exception, pumps for automatic sprinkler systems installed in accordance with SPS 3620903 they're exempt. Okay, that 3620903 addresses NFPA 13D, which is a domestic system. Basically, it comes right off the municipal water supply. Another item here of note is water supply control valves required by IBC 913.4 on a fire pump, where the fire pump supplies either an automatic fire sprinkler system or standpipe system, or both, must be monitored. So those of you who are involved in sprinkler design, please make note. Moving from chapter 9 now into chapter 10. Okay, accessible means of egress in those situations where two-way communication system and elevator landing communication systems must be designed to meet the requirements of NFPA 72. So if you have, I took this from here in the building I'm in. If you have emergency communications, those installations must meet NFPA 72. It was not identified prior to this. The major issue at hand is the designer may require pathway survivability per NFPA 72, depending on the building construction. So this is the driving force behind that. Stairways, got a couple of items. Stairways are always an issue. In this particular case, many times people may choose to put an assisted lift in. Please note, an assisted lift doesn't wash your hands of the need to make accessibility, but if, for instance, you're making alterations in the building, you have disproportionality, so you can't, the expense of a elevator is too expensive, and so you don't put it in, and you're allowed to go that route through the International Existing Building Code, but you still want to have some of maybe the elderly or some of those who are disabled to be able to get to another level. You can put a chairlift in. Now, the question has always become, and always a concern with, the width of the stair, right? Because the stair has a minimum width. You got to have clearance so that you can pass, go up and down. And then, of course, the next question is, if I have a required width, how do I measure it? All right, so this code section is kind of facilitating that. Where installing an inclined platform lift or stairway chairlift, the clear passage width shall be provided with the lift in the unfolded usable position. In other words, we're going to measure that stair for required clearance for width of this and use of the stair based on its unfolded position. Excuse me. Second item here, as you see in the picture on the lower left, is you've probably seen vehicle service pits, right? You drive your car in, they take out your oil plug, they change their oil, right? They're coming in from the oil pit below. There's never been anything in the code that addresses handrails going down to the pit, whether there's no exemption. So by default, you're supposed to put them in. Well, that seems pretty foolish to put a handrail going down to a elevator pit because the handrail is going to have to extend above the top of the service pit. So in that recognition, we added a new amendment to identify this unique situation. We've identified that egress through intervening spaces can't pass through kitchens, storage rooms, closets, bathrooms, or other rooms where privacy is expected, or spaces that are used for similar purposes. Okay, and take a look at the exit and the door. Kind of challenging to leave the room with that particular mixer in the way. I got that online. I'll leave it at that. I was not in Wisconsin, by the way. Corridor continuity. We've always allowed an extension of the corridor to take in, for example, a little bump out lobby area or something along those lines. But we have clarified it here with the 2021 codes. The language is basically the same. We referenced a different table. It's really not, it's the same table with a different section number. But we've added a new criterion for that corridor continuity. So if you want to put a bump out space with, say, some couches and a television, the shared wall between that room and the corridor needs to be at least 50% open. If it's less than that, you'll be forced to enclose it. If it's more than that, that's fine. And it'll be considered part of the corridor. Now, if that is a fire rated corridor, of course, that fire rating extends into that bump out, okay, that living area bump out. Spaces under the grandstands and bleachers, we've codified that the requirements of 1030-111, which requires a 1 hour fire rated separation, shall not apply to open air bleachers that have independent egress to a public way. Okay. Attic spaces, sometimes there are some challenges as to the widths and putting the attic access. So we're going to work with the locals. Where a fire-rated access panel is required to be installed in a roof framing system that has structural members at least 24 inches apart, the opening width may be less than 20 inches where approved by the department or department representative. Toilets and bathrooms, we've created language to clarify that a toilet room shall contain a lavatory and a water closet. Now, many of you have probably attended training here that I've performed the last several years on toilet training as it involves commercial buildings. One of the big issues at hand is there's language under SPS 362.2902 parens 2A, and it talks about the need that a lavatory, okay, it's a sink, must be in every toilet room. Say again, sink must be in every toilet room, or at least one sink must be in a gendered lounge. So for instance, if you had, I see this in high schools quite often, high schools like to have, or elementary schools for that matter, like to have the sinks in an open area so they know that the kids aren't screwing around and messing around, throwing, water all over heck, or for small kids just to ensure that they're properly washing their hands for hygiene purposes. Well, the code also still respects privacy. So in those circumstances, take a school, you would have your toilets and your urinals as appropriate for your men's or ladies. You have to have at least one lab, one sink in that gendered area where privacy is ascertained. Now, if there's additional sinks required, right, by code, you could place them in an open area, but at least one has to be in a gendered area. Now, you might ask, well, geez, we want to make sure those small kids wash their hands. We don't want to have, we just had COVID, etc. We want to make sure that they're getting themselves good and clean. But also the code wants to provide them privacy. I don't know about you guys, but I'm not the best of eaters. I've had hot dogs with a lot of ketchup because I love my ketchup. I love onions, some relish on the side. Sounds good. I'm getting hungry just as I'm talking about it. But the reality is, if I eat the hot dog and something drops, and it's probably going to be everything. It's going to be ketchup. It's going to be the relish. It's going to be onions, and it's probably going to fall right in my crotch, right in my lap. I don't think I really want to be in public going over to a sink trying to wipe my pants off in front of the public. I don't think they really want to see that. I really don't want to do it. And similarly, if a young lady or a woman would eat the hot dog, etc., and it would spill on their blouse, I don't think necessarily they want to clean their blouse in front of the public. So one sink must be in a gendered area, or you have a sink in a toilet room. Every toilet room. There's been a lot of challenges here at the department as it is addressed through the educational systems and what they want, but this is the way the code is written. Special inspections. Here we are. They were previously exempt and now are included for use with the 2021 codes. Now, this section now requires that the supervising professional designer identify third parties to perform the required duties. Third parties may not be the designer of record, an on-site contractor, or the same inspection agency verifying code compliance on behalf of the department or municipality. What's an approved agency? Well, an approved agency is responsible to provide proof of being independent, objective, competent, having the proper equipment and adequate personnel to perform the duties associated with special inspections and testing. The building official is required to determine if the agency is acceptable. Please note, it's not the building designer, it's not the building owner. The building official is required to determine if the agency is acceptable. Hope I emphasize that. Based on this criterion and provide documented conditional approval. I want to emphasize the word documented. Simply saying, well, old Johnny, he ran the test, everything was okay, you need to give us that permit for occupancy, that doesn't cut it. It needs to be documented in writing. You need to provide it to the inspector so that he has it on file so that he can justify the issuing of that building occupancy permit if required by his local municipality. From the record storage standpoint, there's requirements for various methods of record storage that are stipulated in the code as well. Special inspections and tests outlines this inspections and tests required, including frequency and reference standards. Now, I'm going to give you an example here. A poured concrete slab would require 8 separate tests. Precast would require 4 separate tests. And note that retesting and reinspection may be necessary if they can't pass the test the first time they tried it. You know, that's the scenario. But it guarantees that the building is properly built. The one thing I do want to point out, a lot of people probably a little frustrated in the fact that we haven't done inspections and now they're going to be responsible to at least identify how, when, etc. A lot of this section disappears. Why? Well, because the state of Wisconsin is not in a high seismic zone. The vast majority of the state of Wisconsin is seismic design category A. And because of that, a lot of the testing and inspection requirements drop away significantly. Now, in Wisconsin, we do have a seismic zone B in the southeast corner, down Kenosha, Racine, down in that little corner of the state. So if you have a priority building, say a 5-story jail, maybe a hospital, a police department, fire department, if you've got a high priority building in those areas and you have multiple stories for sure, that category B may be applicable for seismic design, and because it's in category B, you will be required to have additional inspections and testing performed. Now, the importance of this slide, there is some uniqueness to this. I got the words underlined that I really want to point out, but in general, the owner or the owner's authorized agent, which many times is going to be the design professional, other than the contractor. Notice again, other than the contractor, shall employ 1 or more approved agencies to provide special inspections and tests during the construction as required under IBC 1705. Approved agencies are to be identified to the building official. Now there's exceptions. Okay? In other words, you don't need to take on special inspections if you meet one of these exceptions. First exception, if the construction is minor in nature. Of course, the question all of you have is, what's that mean? How far can I take it? What is meant by minor in nature? And how do I apply this? We're going to provide some guidance going forward. I don't have all the answers at this time. I told you that from the start. It's a learning experience. Every new code is a learning experience. It's an opportunity to enlighten yourself with all kinds of information. And this is just one of them. And so construction minor in nature is going to be addressed. We'll provide greater details as we go forward as to what that is to apply to. Second exception is U occupancies related to residential. Another exception is cold form steel light frame construction per IBC Chapter 22, or conventional, if you will, wood light frame construction found in Chapter 23. The fourth one is important because remember at the top we said other than the contractor. Now there's an exception here. If the contractor is permitted to employ, the approved agencies where the contractor is also the owner. So for, Billy Bob's Contracting Services, and he's got a brand new building, he owns the building. In that unique circumstance, he then is allowed to employ the approved agencies where the contractor is also the owner. Okay. This particular section of the code doesn't involve special inspections and tests, contractor responsibility, and structural observation. It establishes thresholds for requiring special inspections and tests, which include exceptions for construction of minor nature. The section also establishes the qualifications for the special inspector, as well as the content and format requirements for the reports, which are required to be vetted and collected by the building official. Again, it'll be the responsibility for those involved with this particular project to ensure that the building official is provided all the required testing reports so that he can or she can provide the appropriate building occupancy permit. Now, what kind of inspections are involved? Those inspections could include concrete, welding, masonry, glass masonry, wood, precast. You see the extensive list here. I didn't say it would include, I said it may include, because it depends. Maybe you're not in that seismic B area. Maybe this will fall away. Don't know. It depends. And I know that's not a black and white answer, but it's honest. And you see here at the end here, you got pre-construction load test, as far as deflection, wall partition assemblies, exterior window and door assembly, skylights, slope glazing. And again, there's exceptions to those two. Moving beyond chapter 17, going to chapter 18, saturated soil as evidenced by the presence of redoxamorphic features or other information. Those soils are multiplied by 0.5. In other words, they feel that those soils are not going to be capable of withstanding what would normally be recognized for soil pressure bearing capacity. And they're going to deflect that by half. So if it was 2,000 PSF soil bearing capacity, you're going to be basically at half of that. I didn't know what redoxamorphic was, so I looked it up, and it's basically a reduction in oxidation chemical reaction and the resulting appearance or morphology of the soil horizon. Many of you have seen iron, or even copper for that matter. When iron or copper oxidize, iron turns orange or red. Copper turns green, all right? Manganese turns white. So if this is found, there's some concerns that the stability of the soil is going to be in question, and they're going to reduce the viability of that soil for load-bearing purposes. This is to clarify those scenarios where you're putting that multi-layer roof up, right? Vertical leg of any flashing at the base of an exterior wall that includes 2 layers of a water-resistant barrier shall be installed in a manner that places the vertical leg of the flashing beneath and behind both layers of water-resistant barrier. Okay. Drinking fountain options, this isn't really any change as much as is to provide clarification. We've always allowed where drinking fountains are required, other reasonable alternatives are acceptable as approved by the department. We've helped clarify that. Examples are bottle fillers, bottled water, and bar service. Fixture calculations. Note that exception 2 involving the use of facilities designed to serve all genders was not included as part of our code package. Examples and applications of this rule are outlined in more detail in 101.128, which is the state statutes. Public toilet facilities. This came up several years ago. We really didn't have anything to address it one way or the other. So we created a rule to give guidance. The required public facilities, no, this particular case, we're looking at the toilet facilities, must be provided on site or in an adjacent site under the same ownership. This eliminates the justification for use of a 24-hour restaurant facility across the street on property owned by a different individual. Enough said. Restroom equity. public facilities which must meet the requirements of 101.128 parens 3 and 4 must provide sufficient number of toilets and fixtures to ensure women have a speed of access equal to that of men when at maximum capacity under 101.1282. Now I took this picture. I was out officiating and I had this picture and I thought of the training here, and needless to say, I thought it was appropriate. The point is that many of you who have done larger type projects have heard of potty parity, and you won't find that in the code. It's not written anywhere. It's an internal discussion more than anything else. But potty parity deals with this situation where equity is required. Now, in the building code under 362.2902 parens 2 parens A, so again, 362.2902 parens 2 parens A, it states that if you have over 500 people, so there's your first threshold. Potty parity doesn't come into play until you're over 500 people. Once you're over 500 people, if the designer chooses to provide toilet fixtures over and above the minimum number defined by code for the men. So let's say the code said men require 10 toilet fixtures, right? You get your mix of urinals and toilets, 10 fixtures. And that's what's required by code. But you're going to put 11 in, right? Because you got the space, it's convenient, what the hey. So you're going to put 11 toilet fixtures, only need 10. The code goes on to say that, look, for every one over and above the minimum required by code, in this case it's 1, you need twice as many for the women over and above their minimum. So let's say the men require 10 toilet fixtures, the women require 16. You added 1 extra fixture for the men. Potty parity says you need to have 2 additional toilet fixtures over and above the minimum for the women. So if the women's minimum requirement was 16, you need 2 more, or 18 for the women. That, ladies and gentlemen, is potty parity. Okay. Hoistway enclosures, again, the language here really hasn't changed. It's the same old, but we did provide some clarification. It talks about fire department emergency access to all floors served by passenger elevators in all of the following situations. And we had those areas with residential occupancies. Unfortunately, though, we didn't have an exception, which we've now added, that we exempted passenger elevators serving only floors within a single dwelling unit. Well, I don't think anybody wants the fire department to knock on their door and use their personal elevator to go up and down within your place of residence. It's trying to create a picture here for you, but that's not really what the intent of the code was. This is the public fire access using the public elevator. So this language clarifies that. The provisions in IBC appendices. Now, the appendices don't get used a whole lot, but those appendices involving A, B, D, F to K, M, and O are not included as part of chapters 361 to 366. Exterior design conditions. Okay, so now we've jumped from the building code side and we're going to jump to the energy code. Now, I'm going to tell you right up front, the energy code takes on a different persona than it has in the past. There's not a lot of amendments here. In fact, the vast majority have been removed. It's gone. Not going backwards in the code. So, like I said, a lot of the amendments in the energy code have been removed. So I want to prepare you for that. Design conditions typically have been prescribed via table 363.0302. The department will now, in addition to looking at the prescribed table in the code, will look at ASHRAE 90.1 2019 and the values associated with your building site location. I would encourage the design community to give us a copy of the ASHRAE page identifying the temperatures till we get familiar with it. I want to make sure that you know what you're talking about, that you have the appropriate references, and that the department has knows what you've used for a reference for your exterior design conditions when doing heat loss calculations. Building envelope. Now, within the energy code in the past, we omitted or amended out the need for commissioning. Commissioning is in, with the exception here on this slide. The code section that we're taking exception to required that a final commissioning report be completed and provided by the building owner by the design professional for building envelope performance verification. We have exempted that. Do not have to do that. But please note, this amendment is specific to only the building envelope performance. It does not exempt commissioning as related to HVAC, lighting, etc., as identified in the rest of the IECC. Design professionals may find this helpful in their efforts. We're changing the threshold for when an economizer is required to be installed. Now, you're still required to have an economizer on all rooftop units. That's just a fact. Got a rooftop unit, you got to put an economizer on it if you have cooling system. Now, if you have a split system, right, furnace/condenser, or maybe you have a ductless split system, okay, you guys straight up condenser. If the cooling capacity is 5 tons, or if you will, 60,000 BTU or less, in aggregate cooling, you don't need an economizer. Okay, so 5 tons is 60,000. You're allowed to have cooling up to 60,000. That 60,000 is based on the listing found on the equipment. Don't tell me, well, it's going to be used in such a way it won't reach 60,000, or it'll be used less. It's a 6-ton system, but we're going to use it less. Yeah, I understand. I know how you can play that game. But if it's listed for 6 tons, we're going to treat it as a 6-ton system, and you need an economizer. Now, if you have a gymnasium and you have 2 rooftops, say you have a rooftop 1 and rooftop 2, they're real small. And maybe there are 3 tons for rooftop 1 and there's 3 tons in rooftop 2. Okay, neither one meets 60,000 BTU, right? They're 3 tons, they're 36,000 BTU. 36,000 is less than 60,000. But I want to point out in this discussion, the word aggregate cooling capacity of those systems. The aggregate cooling capacity is the 36,000 rooftop number 1, 36,000 rooftop number 2. They're serving the same space, the gymnasium. So that's 72,000 BTU of cooling capacity, which exceeds the 60,000 threshold. Both systems must have an economizer installed because they exceed the 60,000 in aggregate. Now, there's other exceptions in the code that may be applicable, but I wanted to at least provide that as an example. Fault detection and diagnostics in the code is a requirement for those systems that have an economizer installed. But note, when applying this section, the department has chosen to delete items 2, 3, and 4. And of course, the question becomes, well, what are items 2, 3, and 4? Well, they delete the need to sample the HVAC system's performance at least once every 15 minutes. It deletes automatically to identify and report HVAC system faults, and it also deletes the need to automatically notify authorized personnel of identified HVAC system faults. Clarification on duct insulation. There's always been finger pointing. Well, look, I got a duct up in the attic. See, it's in the building. It's under the roof. See, it's within the building. Well, yeah, it is in the building, but it's not insulated. It's just as cold above the insulation on the bottom side of the cord. And your ductwork goes above. It's just as cold on that area as it is outside the building. Yeah, but I'm within the building. See, I'm underneath the roof. Yeah, yes, you are. So the language we've clarified. We added a note. For the purpose of determining insulation requirements, ductwork located outside of the building envelope. So for instance, if you put ductwork up on the ceiling and you have the insulation blown in, so it's on the basically where the bottom cord of the truss is, and your ductwork goes maybe up and over the top of that. Purposes of enforcement, we're going to treat the ductwork as being located outside of the building envelope, and it'll be considered to be located outside the building. And with that, you'll need an R12 insulation around that ductwork. That's the intent here. A lot of the items dealing with surface water heating, a lot of was eliminated. A lot of reasons for that. State of Wisconsin has eliminated the need for heat traps. A lot of them are incorporated into the water heating appliance anyway. Appliance also eliminates a lot of the direct user applications, which are now been pushed to the plumbing code. So if you got any questions on that, I encourage you to go to the plumbing code. We also have some recirculation issues as identified in the energy code, which now is in the plumbing code so that they take responsibility and enforcement of those rules. There's also rules as related to pools and spas, and we've related several of them in this code package. Now, one of the major items, now we talked about special inspections, Chapter 17 being what I consider to be an important change. I consider this an additionally important change. Those two probably are pretty high on my list if any discussion should come up as to what I would prioritize. Formally, the state of Wisconsin took exception to Section 406 of the Energy Code. Didn't have to apply it. It's called the Additional Efficiency Package Options. They are now part of the code and must be addressed by the submitting design professional. New buildings, building additions, shall achieve a total of 10 credits from tables C406.1 through C406.1 parens 5, so 1 through 5. The means by which the credits are to be attained shall be documented and identified on the plans. Did I say on the plans? Let me say on the plans one more time. On the plans. The means of code compliance need to be on the plans or within the specifications. We need to know how you're achieving the additional efficiency package. Are you putting more additionally high efficiency lighting? Are you putting special lighting controls in over and above the minimums required by the code? Are you putting a renewable energy system in involving renewable energy? Are you putting additional insulation into the building? You tell us. We're not telling you how to do it. We're saying you got to meet this code section and you need to demonstrate that its compliance is viable. You need to identify how you are meeting the 10 credits so that you comply with this code section. Building envelope now will move to the 2021. So if you choose to use ComCheck or the ASHRAE 90.1, ComCheck now will be the IECC 2021. ASHRAE will be 90.1 2019. Okay, so ComCheck still can be used. Strongly encourage it. Your peers throughout the state, I'd say probably 98% of the plans we have use ComCheck as a means to demonstrate building envelope compliance. Similarly, in lieu of Chapter C for commercial buildings, Chapter R for the residential side, which is for residential buildings 3 stories or less above grade. Again, ResCheck instead of ComCheck. ComCheck is for commercial buildings, Res is for residential. Needs to apply the IECC 2021. Okay. When we go now to the mechanical code, we're moving right along here. The mechanical code now has a definition of dry stored, and it's to identify the use of those boats out of water storage areas, which we talked about earlier, that was originally addressed for sprinklering at 5,000 feet. Once you exceed 5,000 foot fire area, you need to sprinkle. This now addresses the ventilation associated with that and gives some definition. Healthcare facilities, those of you who work with the Department of Health Services and are involved in nursing homes, hospitals, perhaps clinics, specialty clinics, you may be required to apply some of the rules from the Department of Health Services. One of those rules involves ASHRAE 170-2017, ventilation of healthcare facilities. In both 3640300 and 3640309, this standard is referenced. Please note in 3640300, it's talking about ventilation requirements as related to a healthcare facility. In 3640309, it talks about the minimum temperatures to be retained in those healthcare facilities. There's some changes to the ventilation requirements. Now, in the past, we've always required that natatoriums have continuous exhaust, right? You're not going to drain the pool at the end of the night because nobody's in the pool and fill it back up the next day. That's not even practical. The water's going to stay there. Well, if the water's going to stay there, the humidity is going to stay there. And if the humidity's there, we need to exhaust it all the time. So we've always had the natatorium requirement that exhausts have to be continuous, but now we've added chlorine storage and handling rooms. Because obviously, if you have chlorine storage, if it's a handling room, etc., that chemical can accumulate, be retained in the space, you'll never get out, and it causes a lot of detriment to the associated building elements, especially anything that's metal. So this is a new requirement. Natural ventilation, please pay close attention. We got some big issues here. One, for those who are designers, you'll like this, the office space. If you have an office space, say it's in the middle of a 16,000 square foot building, if the office maybe is on the middle of a outside wall, if it's less than 300 square feet, you can use natural ventilation. There should be some happy people out there. So you don't have to bring outside air in for those office spaces. Again, if they're at least 300, no more than 300 square feet. I apologize. We don't have a lot of discos. We cleared that out. There is now a section addressing ice arenas without combustion engines, less than 100 persons, where now you can use natural ventilation. Now, FYI, you're probably scratching your head, ice arena without combustion engines. Maybe your kids may have played hockey or you watched a hockey game, but between periods, they have a vehicle called a Zamboni that goes out and it resurfaces the ice, right? It gets all chipped up from all the ice skates, etc., from hockey or figure skating, whatever it may be. The Zamboni goes over the top, resurfaces, and that Zamboni years ago almost was exclusively a combustion engine. Nowadays, a lot of them are electrical in nature, and thus there is no combustion byproducts. Well, combustion engines have byproducts, and for those of you who are Badger fans, you may have known that the Badger women team went out east into a small confined space, very small hockey rink in the Northeast. They got sicker than dogs. They had to take a couple to the hospital after the game because the particular Zamboni, or in this case, combustion engine that resurfaced the ice, it left a trail behind, and the air had no place to go. There was not adequate ventilation, and the air, of course, being heavier than normal air, fell to the ground. It's trapped by the rink and the raised glass around the rink, so there was no place to go, and so the players were kind of trapped in this envelope of really nasty gas. So, long story short, if you're less than 100 people, you can, and you have without combustion engines, you can go ahead and use natural ventilation. If you've got combustion engine for a Zamboni, which resurfaces, then you're back to a mechanical ventilation. Natural ventilation is not an option. This is another issue. Building designers, you think you don't need to know. I'm going to tell you, you do need to know, because you need to be aware of the new ductwork that needs to come into the building. The heating guys, be aware. You need to put this on your to-do list when you're bidding, as well as your design. Note the yellow here. Dwelling units. Okay, what's a dwelling unit? Well, it's an apartment, townhouse, and condo. All right, we got that narrowed down. Notice kitchens are removed. Okay, remember what was the heading? Natural ventilation. Point being, natural ventilation can't be used for a dwelling unit kitchen. I'll say it again. Natural ventilation can't be used to ventilate a kitchen in a dwelling unit. Well, what's that mean, Randy? Well, it means you're going to have to do it by another means. It means since you can't do it by natural ventilation, you'll have to do it by mechanical ventilation. That means you're going to have a fan and you're going to have an exhaust. And that exhaust is going to have an outlet to the outside of the building. Mechanical exhaust is now required to be provided for all dwelling unit kitchens. Now, those requirements have been modified to complement that which is in the national code. So, dwelling unit kitchens can either have 100 CFM intermittent exhaust or 25 CFM continuous exhaust. Now, that intermittent exhaust could be in a ceiling exhaust fan, could be on a wall fan, could be on a range hood, residential range hood. Any of those would be fine. But you have to have 100 CFM intermittent, could be controlled on a wall switch, perfectly legit. Or for those of you who like to deal with indoor air quality and want to go down that route, what you might want to do is go the route of air-to-air heat exchanger, right? Continuous exhaust, take advantage of the continuous exhaust from the kitchen and the bathroom, and then provide outside air continuously to the space. This is a really important note for all HVAC designers, plan reviewers, inspectors, and I'm going to expand that to the building design group. You need to be aware where those kitchens are going to be located, because when you start putting those kitchens away from the outside wall, you're going to create a lot of ductwork. Ductwork's not cheap. Metal's not getting any cheaper. Work with your designer. See what you can do. Be aware of where you're locating those kitchens. Okay. New ventilation requirement. Heating guys, be aware. Corridors now need to be ventilated. Every 100 square feet needs 7.5 CFM. Now, many times in apartment buildings, the corridors are fire rated. And in some cases, some people may not ventilate at all under the current code, and technically they're not required. There's technically a non-occupied area, the corridor. Same thing goes with stairs. We don't require you to ventilate a stair. It's typically a non-occupied area. But under the 2021 code, the corridor will require to be ventilated. This will be an issue because if the corridor is required to be ventilated, as per IBC 1020, corridors may be required to be fire rated because it's residential if you're over 10 people. Then every penetration to that corridor enclosure will require a smoke damper. And depending on where you orientate it and what exceptions you might be able to meet, just make the assumption you need a fire damper, smoke damper at every penetration of that corridor enclosure that's fire rated. Only after you can justify that you have an exemption should you think about removing the need for a fire damper or a smoke damper to those duct penetrations. Nail salon. In the past, as you can see, we had a Wisconsin amendment kind of softened up the mechanical code a little bit. We said, look, the exhaust inlet shall be located in the work area where, for example, there's a pedicure, manicure going on. So all you had to do is have it somewhere in the work area. It could be on the wall, could be in the ceiling. You might have 7 chairs. You might have it on chair number 1. You didn't have to have it at each and every chair. It just had to be in the work area. Now this is going out the window. That's being removed. We're going to treat it just as it is at the national level. Manicure tables and pedicure stations not provided with factory installed exhaust inlets shall be provided with exhaust inlets located not more than 12 inches horizontally and vertically from the point of chemical application as required by IMC 50220. So not that there's that many manicure pedicures, but for those who are involved with it, note the change for ventilation purposes. We tweaked the exhaust outlet location and added just a bit of wording. It's always been a requirement to be located at least 12 inches vertically from the adjoining grade and the bottom area of an area away, but we're also adding now the adjacent roof. Obviously, there's going to be snow on the roof. We want to be at least 12 inches above. Note that due to different weather conditions, you may need to be over and above 12 inches, but that's the code requirement. Dishwashing appliances. Dishwashing appliances, in the past, the requirement for minimum ventilation was amended out of the code. We're eliminating that amendment. And now the code has a requirement for exhausting using a Type 2 hood over dishwashing appliances. That minimum is 100 CFM per linear length of hood. So if the hood is 3 feet, you need 300 CFM. Now, there is an exception to the installation of a hood. There's actually a couple of them. One of them could be a low temperature dishwasher. Okay, we need verification of that. Have to be on the plan. I need a name. I need a model. Who's the manufacturer? Where's the model? What's the installation instructions? Give me as a plan reviewer or a code official justification that you don't need that hood. On the other hand, another option is to go to IMC 5073. 5073 allows loads, heating loads, moisture loads, etc., to be addressed or incorporated into the HVAC system. In other words, you're going to have greater ventilation requirements to try to distribute or remove that, especially if you have barometric damper on, where you're going to relieve some of the interior air to the outside. You have to give us proof of a system design that provides the intent of the code of 100 CFM for every what would be 1 foot of linear length of hood. Okay, designers, that's on your shoulders here. Plastic venting. This is important for the building designers here. Don't ignore this, because you need to be aware of this as you're making changes to a building. Plastic venting systems associated with gas-fired appliances shall meet the requirements of UL 1738, inclusive of special testing and marking requirements for the pipe fitting and cement. So where's this leading? It's a special note. It's for direct vent sealed combustion venting. There's been updates to the ANSI Z21.47 standard, which address the use of gas furnace cellular core venting materials. You know, the plastic that you use to extend the intake in the vent from a direct vent sealed combustion furnace. As part of the update, ABS and PVC cellular core venting materials no longer are allowed when in compliance with Z2147 2022, which went into effect on December 1st of 2022. So if that standard is a requirement of the installation instructions, you can't use ABS and PVC. This is a big issue, because if you put in new equipment, you can't use that type of plastic. And more important, equipment replacement becomes an issue. You can't simply just put in the furnace and attach the existing system. You install it against the listing. The listing says it no longer viable. So if those original materials that are in the building installed today as part of this existing building, and now you got a furnace says that's not allowed, you got to take it out. Where gas-fired central furnaces are being replaced, existing ABS and PVC cellular core venting materials must also be replaced. And my heart goes out to you, because that can be a real dog in an existing building. Building professionals, be aware what your status is. If you anticipate old furnace equipment being moved out and you're tearing off some walls and you've got that venting in the wall, work with your mechanical guy, let him know so that he knows he has an opportunity to get in that wall and replace with proper plastic venting materials for his new furnace, if indeed they're going with a new furnace. Smoke detection system controls. Now, this has to do with the Department of Health Services. And what happens is, in our code, we put smoke detection on the return side, right? If you're over 2,000, 15,000, there's a need for smoke detection, unless you meet an exception. DHS, instead of putting it on the return side, puts it on the supply side, because they want the clean air coming in. They don't want a burning building, which is a side of the hospital, to spew all their dirty air into the hospital where there's surgical actions being taken and people with health deficiencies. So the building code requires it on the return air side. DHS requires it on the supply side. Okay, so be aware of that. With that in mind, there's also a requirement to isolate air handling units. So, for instance, if you had smoke dampers as required per the various DHS administrative codes and per NFPA standard 90A, you need to have them trigger and isolate the air handling system so it doesn't get gunked up. Now, that's not very technical, I realize, but I think you know what I mean. They're going to isolate that unit and close off everything. As before, we did talk about this earlier in the building code. The mechanical code has it also. There is a printing in both sides because the building code is the primary reference for fire assemblies and protection mechanisms. The mechanical code under 607 does address similar information, but it is a secondary reference. So just be aware of it. That's why it's in both places. Some reference standards is NFPA 45 2019. This is for fume hoods. So if you choose to, going to be involved with a university, which is one of the most common ones, but some research facilities, and you're going to put a fume hood in, I would encourage you to take a look at NFPA 45 2019. It's typically associated with shafts in the building code under 362.040717 parens 717.5.3 because it's for shafts. And then if you haven't seen what that ASHRAE 170 standard looks like, this is what it looks like, just for those of you who are not aware of it. There's been some requirements removed in the international existing building code. So now we've jumped from the mechanical code to the existing building code. The requirements in IBC 303 are not included as part of 361 to 366. This code section addresses storm shelters constructed as rooms or spaces within existing buildings. Note that storm shelters currently are not part of the building code. They will not be part of the building code going forward when we adopt the 2021, and thus there's no requirement for it to be installed per a requirement in the code, in the existing building code, should you choose to put it in a building that is already existing. There are some additional accessibility requirements that are noted through one of the new amendments. It's basically for physically disabled persons and the related housing requirements, which are found in 101.132. The existing building code has taken on a different look. Much of what you knew was in the former code is still in there. It's just in a different location. We formally exempted Chapter 4 for prescriptive purposes. Chapter 4 is now what is now Chapter 5. So we made the change here. You can see that the 4 has been eliminated, the 5 has been added for purposes of code enforcement. Many of the Wisconsin amendments are still there. I do want to point out, if you're looking for 705.2, which is the requirements for ascertaining accessibility in existing buildings, that has been moved from Chapter 7 to Chapter 3. That's a big move because we are all used to Chapter 7. It is now in Chapter 3. So if you're looking for it and think it's lost, I assure you it's not lost. It's just been relocated. There's another amendment here as it deals with historic buildings. Now, in the past, we didn't require any actions whatsoever to be taken for energy conservation as related to a historic building. There's the historic aesthetics, the persona of a historic building, and you don't want to take that out. But on the other hand, we have what I feel were some very viable actions to be taken should you start opening cavities up. So if you have a historic building, if you have existing ceilings, walls, or floor cavities exposed during alterations, they need to be filled with insulation. Now, specifically, this would be the exterior walls and those floor cavities between a conditioned versus an unconditioned space. B, all replacement skylights, windows, door assemblies shall meet the minimum requirements of the IECC unless specifically designed to address unique aesthetics associated with the historic structure and nature of the building. Glass-only replacements in an existing sash or frame are exempt from the application of the IECC. Basically, what you touch, you bring up to code, but they're going to take an exception here. Take, for instance, a church, and you got stained glass windows. And for whatever reason, you're going to take one stained glass window out, and this is an old church. It's a historic church, and you just remove the window. It says, hey, you have to meet code requirements, but we do have the exception here for unique aesthetics. And if you put back in stained glass window, which very likely is not going to meet any energy code criterion, that could be a conflict, but the language lets you do that. But just let us know so that we can address it accordingly as code officials. Lastly, roofs without insulation in the cavity and where the sheathing or insulation is exposed during re-roofing, those roofs shall be insulated either above or below the sheathing so as to meet the minimum insulation required by the IECC. All right, so maybe you can't get 38, 48, 60, whatever it is. Maybe you can't get that. Or shall provide insulation to the greatest extent possible. So maybe you only have 6 inches. You might only be able to get 6 inches of bad insulation in there, right? So we'd only be looking for 6 inches of bad insulation because that's all the room you got. You know, it's a historic building. So this is another important aspect for those of you who may be working on existing buildings, more specifically the historic type building. In general, historic buildings do require a report, but we're exempting that, so we're not going to require that to be part of the code requirements. Now, we've gotten through the main amendments. Let me tell you where you can find information. If you don't have a copy of the 2021 codes, they're free. That's a 4-letter word, and nobody's mad. So free is good. Free is online. So if you go to this code site, codes.iccsafe.org, you will find that you have the opportunity to get in and obtain a view of the iCodes. So you go onto the site, you go on the left, you click on iCodes, then on the right of that entry, you click on the 2021 iCodes, and you'll have all the codes shown to you as individual front pages. You click on that code, and you can view the 2021 codes for free online. Now, on the same site, instead of clicking on 2021, you could get the 2000 code or the 2006 or the 2009 or the 2015. You could even take a look at the 2024 if you want to look ahead on this site. It's free for viewing. Now, these Wisconsin amendments. I will say again, we have trained on the Wisconsin amendments. We haven't talked about the changes in the code, the written published materials. We've only talked about the amendments. The amendments, what I've addressed today, is based upon what has been preliminary materials. When the final version comes out, and that final version will not come out until September 1st. So don't ask ahead of time because I don't have it. You can get, there's other available entities out there, the original public hearing copy, the copy that goes to the legislative copy. But again, I want to emphasize, they are not the final copy. There may be changes. And if somebody pulls those up and thinks that's going to get them through everything, I hate to disappoint you. There could be changes made at the LRB. I don't know what they are. I'm not part of that. And neither does this department. We won't know until you know. Okay, it'll be September 1st. If you want to get a view of those amendments, you can go to this website on the department's website. You just click on this. I'm sure many of you are writing it down, but we'll have this presentation recorded. We'll have it on our website, be available to you. You click on this. you go and you click on commercial building code. There's all kinds of codes there, right? The electrical code, plumbing code, uniform dwelling code, fire code, on and on and on. We're going to go to the commercial building code. We're going to click on that. We're going to find the appropriate chapter, right? Chapter 361 is administration. 362 are amendments to the building code. 363 are amendments to the energy conservation code. 364 are amendments to the mechanical code. 365 are amendments to the fuel gas code. And 366 are amendments to the international existing building code. So you pick the code you want. Then, and this is for those of you who kind of know how codes have looked in the past as issued by the department, if you want to get it into a 2-column segment rather than the legislative review, you click on a red and white PDF icon button, which is located in the right to the right of the help statement on the upper right, to get a standardized administrative code layout for printing purposes. That's a lot of words, but this is what you're going to get, all right? If you do the legislative copy, which is at the top, everything's going to be printed to the left side, literally. Now, if you want to get the administrative code as typically issued by the department, what you do is just take and find the help, take the first icon, click on that first icon right here. And what you'll get is the 2-column layout, which is probably more what many of you older people have been, older people like me, experienced people are used to, the 2-column format. And then you can just print this out, and then you'll have the complete amendment for whatever chapter is you identified. In this case, this was 361. So that's how you can download that and get the administrative code as of September 1st. Now, the department is currently addressing actions for making the Wisconsin amendments readily accessible to designers, contractors, building owners, and code enforcement officials. The department will create and make available insert pages with the Wisconsin amendments. Now, these insert pages are typically used with 3-ring binders. So if you're familiar with the 3-ring binder of the I-codes, these are really handy, because what you do is you go on the website, you print out these amendments as found on insert pages, and you insert the pages into the location in the code where they're applicable. So if you've got a bunch of sprinkler requirements that are amendments that we issued from the code, they're probably all going to be in 903 of the building code, and you put all those pages in 903. Another action that I would suggest is you put them on colored paper, because then when you're paging through your code, you go, oh yeah, here's, you know, I'm reading the code and hey, there's a colored page nearby. I know there's an amendment somewhere in this area of the code. So if you put it on a light colored paper, yellow, green, blue, whatever, I don't recommend dark papers because they don't copy very well. So if by chance you're going to copy it and share it with a friend, if it's in dark red background, it doesn't copy. It gets very, very dark. So you want a light colored blue, light colored yellow, light colored orange. You get the idea, light colors. So that's what the department's going to address. Now, I want to be clear. They're not available now. They won't be available on September 1. Because as I've said on multiple occasions, the amendments will not be out in their entirety for use until September 1. So needless to say, you got to give us some time to put it together. Keep your eyes open. I'm sure there'll be some discussions as directed by email by the department concerning when we will complete that. At present, the amendment insert pages are online for use with the 2015 codes. We'll make changes as they come. We can't even address this or even begin to address this until September 1st. When September 1st comes, some decisions will be made. We'll have some assigned people, and they will be addressed. It'll take some time. I don't have a timetable. I can't even provide you a guess. But the department has committed to this action. Additionally, I want to make everyone online aware that the department has made an inquiry to the ICC to incorporate the WIA. I've been doing too many exams lately. To incorporate the WI Wisconsin amendments directly into the ICC code publications. In other words, it would be incorporated right with the code. Many of you may have remembered back in 2002, when we adapted our first version, we had worked with the ICC on that, and they included a Wisconsin version of the code with the amendments. We are making an inquiry into that now. There has been no commitment one way or the other. The feasibility is in question as far as costs, not only to us as a department, but also the cost to you as a consumer. Is that reasonable and viable? So don't have any answers on this second part, but let you know that's something that we're working on at this time. All right, with that having been said, I do want to say thank you very much to all those involved. It's been a joy to work with you. Certainly glad to have the chance to cross with you again today. A lot of people here online. I see there's 525 people online. That's pretty incredible. Shows the efforts of our professionals here in the state of Wisconsin, the contractors, our various inspectors throughout the state, taking your time. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to me for what is now 2.5 hours. Certainly appreciate all your efforts and certainly want you to, be part of the profession that you know and love. You got questions, certainly hold them for a little bit. We're not to the point of really getting our feet on ground. We're learning as you are. We haven't enforced this code. We are in a learning aspect, much like you are. I encourage you to do everything possible to do investigation on your end rather than pick up the phone and contact the plan review staff. As you can imagine, we're very busy. Did I say busy? We're really busy. We're doing exam updates. We got commercial building inspector, HVAC designer. We got HVAC qualifier exams, all have to be updated. We have the insert pages, which we talked about. We have standard paragraphs that have to be updated. We have just to get ourselves up to date. So there's a lot of things going on here. Please work with your fellow professionals as much as possible. We'll do as much as we can. I'm sure there'll be other training opportunities going forward. I don't know the timetable of those. We'll keep you informed as we know more. Again, I want to thank everybody for your efforts today and your efforts towards maintaining your professional development. It really means a lot. You are 14% shorter than you were in 2004. So yeah, you're going to be very busy. And now you know why. I do want to thank everyone. This is Randy Dahman signing off on behalf of the Wisconsin Department of Safety and Professional Services. Good day.
All right, Randy, thank you.